In several previous videos of mine, I've made the point that the Russian military has changed its tactics as to how it's fighting the war in Ukraine, and that this is starting to show on the front lines. In this video, I want to expand on that topic a little bit. Now, what I'm about to say comes from a variety of different sources, including other military analysts, war correspondents who are present on the front lines in Ukraine, and not just necessarily war correspondents, but also regular people who are present there on the front lines who are talking to these soldiers. Some of them are even soldiers themselves, particularly in the armies of the Donbas republics, and also some statements that have been made by various senior Russian military commanders, including the Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu. What all of these individuals have in common is that at one point or another they have made some statement, either outright stating or alluding to the fact that the Russian military is going about some particular task in a completely different manner than what it did in the early days and weeks of the war. For example, all of the procedures and communications that are required in order to launch something like a Caliber cruise missile at a target have been overlooked and revamped so that the whole procedure is on the order of 10 times faster. So it takes up about 10 times less time than in the early days of the war. Other examples include things like urban warfare, where the Russian military has also overlooked many of its tactics and procedures, so that something like storming a well-defended building is much safer and results in much fewer casualties from the Russian side. And this, in particular, is something that I remember was being explained by a war correspondent in Mariupol. Yet other examples include the Russian Air Force, where, as Jacob Dreisen explained on the Dreisen report, Russian attack aircraft, ground attack aircraft, have begun flying much lower and closer to the ground, so that it basically becomes impossible for them to be shot down by any air defenses, including man-portable air defenses. If you look at some of the videos where Sukhoi 25s or even Sukhoi 34s, ground attack aircraft, are seen flying over some particular location, those aircraft appear and then disappear in the span of 2 seconds. That is way too quick for them to be targeted by pretty much anything. Another example that I haven't seen anybody talk about, but one that I can surmise, it seems to me that the Russian artillery has also revamped its tactics, that Russian artillery has begun using a lot more drones and a lot more guided munitions than in the early days of the war, so that they don't need nearly as much time or as many shells to destroy a particular fortified location, a defensive position, as they did in the early days of the war. Anyways, these are just the cases that I have heard about. I'm sure that there are many other cases involving many other weapon systems and branches of the military that I haven't heard about, which have also revamped their tactics, how they're going about this war, which have also in turn led to increased effectiveness. But perhaps more important than this is the fact that Russian military servicemen and the servicemen of the Donbas republics, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, are becoming not only more experienced, but also, especially in the case of the two Donbas republics, are also becoming better armed than they were in the early days of the war. And I am particularly noting the Donbas republics here because, unlike the Russian military, the militias of the Donbas republics are mainly fighting using conscripts, and these conscripts are neither well equipped nor well trained. There are reports of these conscripts lacking even basic equipment such as radios, personal protective equipment, Kevlar bodysuits, not to mention heavier equipment such as self-propelled artillery or drones or tanks or anything of that nature. But as time goes on, these men gain more and more combat experience. they get more and more weapons shipments from the Russian military and from the Russian military-industrial complex, and they also capture some equipment which is left behind by Ukrainian forces, which also increases the number of weapon systems that they have available. Again, this is especially applicable to the militias of the Donbas republics, but it also plays a role for the military of the Russian Federation. And perhaps one of the brightest examples of how this is changing the situation on the ground is the recent fighting over the town of Krasny Liman. According to Russian language YouTuber and military analyst Yuri Podolaka, the assault on Krasny Liman was an astounding success for the Russian armed forces. And if you don't trust pro-Russian analysts on this topic, which Yuri Podolaka undoubtedly is, then I invite you to listen to the words of Alexei Arestovich, the Ukrainian presidential advisor, which, as Alex Christoforou on the Duran, in my opinion, rightly pointed out, he is basically the Baghdad Bob of Kiev, the Kiev clown, if you will. A figure that has been massively playing up Ukrainian victories, even making up Ukrainian victories, while completely ignoring Ukrainian defeats since the very first days of the war. When a figure like this tells you that the situation is very, very dire, and that the assault on Krasny Liman and the fact that Russian forces captured the entire town and completely secured it in the span of 3 days, that is telling something. When the Kiev clown tells you how desperate the situation is for Kiev, you better believe that something is very wrong. So anyways, Krasny Liman is a town that has a population of about 20 to 25,000. And according to Yuri Podolaka, this town was very well defended, was essentially fortified by the Ukrainian military in the same style as Mariupol once was. So there was a sizable garrison of the Ukrainian armed forces garrisoned in this town, and after 2 days of fighting, they were forced to retreat. And it was apparent after the very first day of fighting that the town will fall to the Russian military. The Russian forces surrounded the town on 3 sides, but notably left a corridor to allow the Ukrainian garrison to withdraw from the city, which is exactly what happened. As a result, the city did not sustain heavy infrastructural damage like Mariupol did, and it came under the control of the Russian armed forces very quickly. Of course, another big factor in this victory is the low morale that the Ukrainian forces are currently experiencing for all sorts of reasons that I've noted in my previous videos. Because of the demotivating, demoralizing factor that many of these videos have, which are put out basically daily by various Ukrainian platoons and battalions, which complain about their dire, desperate situation, how their commanders tricked them, how they're being sent as cannon fodder to the front lines. Because of the precedent in terms of morale that the loss of Mariupol has set forth, because many of the soldiers that now make up the armed forces of Ukraine have only recently been conscripted, they're inexperienced, many of them come from the territorial defense forces, and many of these green forces begin to rout much more easily and much more quickly than their more experienced counterparts in more veteran battalions and brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces. So with that information out of the way, I now want to shift gears a little and focus on another topic. A reasonable question would be, if the Russian side is becoming so much better armed, so much more experienced than it was in the early days of the war, wouldn't it be logical for the Ukrainian side to do the same, for the Ukrainian side to change up their tactics, to receive new ammunition, new weapon systems, and for their soldiers to gradually become more experienced? Now, this is a question that I've been pondering, and I think that the short answer to that question is no. The Ukrainian forces aren't going to receive much new equipment because they don't have a military-industrial complex. As I've noted earlier, the Ukrainian military-industrial complex has been essentially flattened by the Russian military. It doesn't exist anymore, so the only way that Ukraine can acquire new weapon systems is via shipments from Western countries. And Western countries can't deliver that equipment in any significant numbers because Ukraine's railroad system is busted up, which severely limits the amount of heavier weapon systems and even to some extent lighter weapon systems that can physically be delivered to Ukraine. But on top of that, you have the Russian Air Force, which is destroying all of the depots and all of the locations where this equipment might be concentrated. Now, I have to point out here that the Russians are never going to destroy 100% of the equipment that is delivered to Ukraine, at least not before they reach the front lines. But some percentage of this equipment is being destroyed before it can even be delivered to the front lines, which adds another layer of complexity for Ukraine and for the collective West when it comes to weapons shipments. Now, when it comes to changing up the tactics of the Ukrainian army, they might be able to change up a few small things, but by and large, their ability to do anything is extremely limited, mainly by the fact that Russia has much more equipment and many capabilities that the Ukrainians, frankly, cannot even dream of at this point. But more importantly, when it comes to battlefield experience, when it comes to training your soldiers, the Ukrainians are going to be in a very dire situation because in order to have experienced soldiers, you first need those soldiers to survive and ideally to win a few battles. You need them to not be critically injured, not be taken as prisoners of war, and of course, to not be killed. Now, the Russians are the ones who are winning all of these big battles. They have been winning all of the major important battles since day one. And at this point, it looks like they're the ones who are winning all of the battles, even the minor skirmishes. So any soldiers that Ukraine sends to fight against the Russian army are most likely going to be gone, if not after the very first battle, then after 2 or 3 battles at most. And when you're limited to simply drafting new soldiers, sending them to the front lines, seeing them get killed or captured, then drafting even more new soldiers, sending them to the front lines again, rinse and repeat, obviously you're not going to be building up a large army of experienced troops. On the contrary, all of your experienced troops, all of the contractors, all of the highly motivated, ideologically motivated people that you have had in the earlier days of the war, such as the Azov battalion, are going to be whittled down to basically nothing, and you're going to be left with an army which is completely green, i.e., the exact opposite of what the Russian military and the military of the Donbas republics is experiencing. So we're basically seeing this snowball effect that's starting to take place, not only in terms of morale, not only in terms of troop morale, but also in terms of combat experience, in terms of the number of weapon systems that is available to both sides, and also in terms of the number of defensive positions that the Ukrainian forces can expect to have in the following weeks and months. And also, if you want to dig even deeper, in terms of economics as well. Ukraine has to worry about its economy collapsing. The only reason that the Ukrainian economy hasn't completely collapsed yet is because it is receiving financing and some support, some material support from Western countries. But given that Ukraine's railroad system is busted up, the sea to which the ports are connected is controlled entirely by the Russian Navy, as well as the fact that all of Ukraine's industry, or the vast majority of it in any case, is located in eastern Ukraine, which is experiencing increasing disruptions because of the fighting that is going on there. Some of this territory is being captured. all of these factors combined also lead to an economic crisis for Ukraine, which is something that I haven't really talked about until now. So these are some thoughts that I wanted to put out there, why the Russian position is looking much stronger than it was before, whereas the Ukrainian position is looking increasingly weaker and more unsustainable. It's basically this snowball effect which is taking place due to a variety of factors, mostly military factors, but also to some extent economic factors. Anyways, please let me know what you think on this matter, write a comment, and also if you're watching this on YouTube, as always, be sure to hit the like button, it helps the algorithm. Recommend this video to other people, and be sure to check out my other channels on the free speech platforms, Telegram and Rumble, if you're not already watching this on Rumble, that is. The links to all of my channels will be in the video description. So with that said, I thank you for watching this video and wish you all the best.